Good evening to everyone who's here. I am thrilled to welcome you to Portrait of the Artist, a panel in celebration of Yolanda Lopez's legacy, featuring scholars, curators, and artists from San Diego and Northern California. And this is presented in conjunction with the exhibition Yolanda Lopez, Portrait of the Artist, which explores Lopez's influential feminist corpus of the 1970s and 80s on view through April 24th at the Museum of Contemporary Art, San Diego Downtown. I'm 𝘗𝘰𝘳𝘐𝘢𝘕, Senior Curator at MCASD, and I'm proud to be the curator of this exhibition, which was organized in close collaboration with the artist. And although we wish we could be together in person tonight, we are thrilled to gather virtually for this panel discussion that has been twice postponed and now delayed by 20 minutes. But we are thrilled to be here celebrating Yolanda Lopez. I want to thank you again for joining us. First, let me pause to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from my home in San Diego on the unceded territory of the 𝘗𝘠𝘳𝘐𝑢𝑚𝑒𝑖 Nation. The 𝘗𝘠𝘳𝑚𝑒𝑖 people have stewarded these lands for generations. We, MCASD's staff, extend our gratitude for the opportunity to work and learn in their traditional homelands. We encourage everyone to take a moment to consider the ancestral land on which we currently stand. I'd also like to start out with a few thank yous to our sponsors tonight. We are grateful to California Humanities, a nonprofit partner of the National Endowment for the Humanities, for supporting the exhibition and its programs with the 2020 Humanities for All project grant. I'd also like to acknowledge the institutional support of MCASD, which is provided by the City of San Diego Commission for Arts and Culture, the County of San Diego Community Enhancement Fund. And lastly, I want to thank San Diego Centro Cultural de la Raza for their partnership and for lending to the exhibition from their archive. And to thank you to Rio Yanez and the Yolanda Lopez Legacy Trust. I just want to mention that all the images you see tonight appear courtesy of the Yolanda Lopez Legacy Trust. In a moment, I'm going to show some installation images of the exhibition, but first I want to welcome our esteemed panelists, and we'll offer more substantial bios before each of them speaks. I'm delighted to have with us tonight 5 amazing scholars, curators, and an artist, each of whom knew Yolanda Lopez in various capacities as a friend or colleague, as a mentor, mentee, as an icon. And each one profoundly influenced this project and my own thinking about the exhibition at MCASD. Welcome to Irena Lara, who is a professor of women's studies and affiliated faculty in Chicana and Chicano studies at San Diego State University, and who was an advisor on the exhibition and contributed to our catalog. Teresita Romo, who is an art historian and independent curator, as well as lecturer and affiliate faculty in the Chicano Studies Department at UC Davis. Leticia Franco, who is a Chicano curator and executive director of the Balboa Art Conservation Center here in San Diego. Jessica Sabogal, who is a muralist, printmaker, and painter. Solomani, a doctoral candidate in art history in UCSD's Department of Visual Arts, as well as a professor of Chicana and Chicano studies and an independent curator. These panelists have all exhibited Yolanda's work, written about Yolanda's work, and made work about Yolanda's work, and they will share about their relationship to her practice, exploring her expansive legacy. And we're also going to hear about some of Yolanda's work that's not in the exhibition tonight, which will, fill in the context of her larger 5-decade career. Let's get started with the slides. I'm eager to hear from the panelists, but I also want to introduce the work of Yolanda Lopez, who passed away in September, just a few weeks before our exhibition opened. And let's go to the next slide, which I think features Jess's work. Lopez was an artist, an activist, and an educator who was celebrated for her role in the Chicano civil rights movement and for her iconic Guadalupe series. Let's go to the next slide. And with her exuberant Portrait of the Artist as a Virgin of Guadalupe of 1978, she produced one of the earliest feminist transformations of the figure and inspired subsequent generations of Chicanx artists and thinkers. We'll hear more about that shortly. You can see here that Lopez depicted herself in running shoes with Guadalupe's mantle billowing behind her, becoming an emblem of defiant joy. Let's go to the next slide. Here, so this is how our exhibition at the Museum of Contemporary Art downtown begins. You can see her series, 3 Generations, 𝘗𝘂𝘢𝘕𝘥𝘢𝘪𝘳, that greets you when you enter the exhibition. I actually want to go back to the previous slide and have Yolanda's image while I just read a brief biography. Sorry, to go back to the previous slide, or just wherever we land. Lopez was born and raised in the Barrio Logan neighborhood of San Diego, and she spent most of the 1960s in San Francisco and was based there permanently after 1979. The artist traced her formation to the student activism of that era and to her role as a Chicano her role as a cultural worker, first in the Third World Liberation Front at San Francisco State and in the Chicano civil rights movement. In these years, she produced works of protest art that reinterpret popular symbols to question the terms of belonging in American society, such as those she created as a founding member of 𝘗𝘪𝘳𝘐𝘳 𝘬𝑪𝑎, 7 of the people, a movement that galvanized San Francisco's Latinx community in response to one of the earliest high-profile police brutality cases. Lopez was an accomplished artist and organizer when she returned to San Diego in the early 1970s, producing a breakthrough body of paintings, drawings, and collages and photographs that investigate and reimagine images of Chicanx women in Chicanx culture and society at large. Let's go to the next slide. Despite Lopez's immense influence on generations of artists and thinkers, this is her first solo exhibition in a museum. It has often been described as a retrospective, and it's really not. It concentrates on a period in Lopez's production beginning in 1975 and continuing into the 1980s, when she created the final works in her celebrated Guadalupe series. She had returned to San Diego in the 1970s to complete her education. She got her BFA at San Diego State, and then she entered graduate school at the University of California, San Diego. And our show brings together 50 works in oil pastel, paint, charcoal, and collage and photography to highlight her use of portraiture as a strategy for visualizing collective empowerment. Entering the galleries, you're confronted with 3 Generations, 𝘗𝘂𝘢𝘕𝘥𝘢𝘪𝘳. Lopez created this series really inspired by her embrace of Chicana feminism in the early 1970s. These are 8-foot charcoal drawings of herself, her mother, and her grandmother at a scale on par with the pantheon of male heroes often featured in Chicano murals of the era. She isolated the figures on expanses of white butcher paper, omitting contextual details to focus on each woman's comportment and body language. These charcoal drawings spent actually the majority of the first year of the pandemic in Zucker Conservation Studio in Oakland, and they look beautiful in the exhibition. Let's keep going. Here's a detail so that you can really see the drawings, and then the next slide, which presents 2 full-length charcoal self-portraits that Lopez created in 1976 that integrate airbrush and collage. These are 2 portraits that she created that have never been publicly seen before. She didn't really intend them for public view when she created them, but they point to her evolving feminist concerns and strategies at the time and represent a step toward her more metaphorical use of her own likeness, which is presented in future series as a collective portrait. You can go to the next slide for a detail of these to get a better look at them. I'll just leave them on the screen, and I'll try to go through a bit more quickly with the rest of the images in the exhibition. We can go to the next slide. Okay, and here in the next gallery, we move forward in time to explore the artist's larger Guadalupe series, which was created between 1978 and 1988. And in addition to the well-known oil pastel triptych of the self-portrait, the portrait of her mother and her grandmother, the Guadalupe series also includes numerous studies in photo montage and mixed media collage. And these were media that really if you can go to the next slide, let's see. Well, I'm going to give you first a detail of the triptych, and I know our panelists are going to talk more about these images. And the next slide. Thank you. And so our exhibition features these many studies for the Guadalupe series. These are our studies Yolanda made using collage and photo montage. This is the way she really was able to deconstruct and reconstruct Guadalupe, inserting a range of female figures from pre-Columbian goddesses to contemporary working class women, such as the artist family and friends, into the Virgin's accustomed place. And I'm just going to show you a few of these. This was really Lopez's research as she created the final Guadalupe triptych, and you can go to the next image. Here are a couple others. And the next image. The Guadalupe series also includes Lopez's tableau vivant, a series of living pictures at the time that were captured by Susan Mogul and document her charismatic performance as Guadalupe, which is part, improv comedy and part conceptual art and part political revolution. Let's go to the next slide. And two later collages that she created in 1981, following her return to San Francisco. We have Eclipse and Virgin at the Crossroads. And then the next slide. Thank you. And then she concluded the Guadalupe series with the large painting Nuestra Madre, completed in 1988, which conflates Guadalupe with a statue of the Aztec goddess Guadalupe. And I'll show you a detail of that based on her earlier study for the Guadalupe series. Next slide, please. And the exhibition moves into her, Yolanda Lopez's runner series. The series is called Adonde Vas Chicana, Getting Through College, and it was created a bit earlier in her second year at UCSD after she had taken up cross-country runner. And she created this series of large-scale, again, paintings on butcher paper, in which she portrays herself as a runner, a picture of strength and vitality and movement set in contrast to the modernist architecture of UCSD's campus, through which she figures the institution and its structures. I'll show you a couple more here. And then it concludes with the triumphant, two large, this is a 12-foot wide painting, and then concluding with the triumphant runner on my own. Again, this is a 12-foot wide painting on butcher paper, in which the runner is seen to transcend not only the university behind her, but also the frame of the picture with her head and her hand and her foot just jutting just beyond the picture's frame. And then the next slide. The exhibition concludes with a series of photographs that Lopez created in 1979 following her return to San Francisco, which were not part of the Guadalupe series, but in their nuanced portrayal of Chicana womanhood, perhaps they could be, and Yolanda felt that they were in keeping with the spirit of the show, and so we included this series of photographs that were taken as a result of her interest in lowrider cars in the Mission District. And this is part of a larger series documenting everyday life in the Mission that she created. And if we can go to the next slide, thank you. She began photographing. She learned about this all-female car club, and the women had requested to be photographed with their trophy as a record of their accomplishment. And it resulted in this really trusting photo session with these young women. And Notably, Yolanda said, that she didn't tell them to smile, but in the last image that we'll see here, one of the women does have a big smile on her face. And I think it's a nice way to end the exhibition. If you can move to the next slide. Because it just reminds us that among Lopez's most indelible images are those that depict defiant joy. And with that, I want to turn it over to our panelists. We're going to begin with Irena Lara tonight. So let's actually go back to the slideshow and advance to Irena's slides. And then I'll start with my introduction. Irena Lara is a Chicana scholar, writer, teacher, femtor, not mentor, and spiritual activist who is a professor and undergraduate advisor in the Department of Women's Studies and is affiliated with the Department of Chicana and Chicano Studies at San Diego State University. She has an American Studies Honors BA with a race and ethnicity focus from Stanford University and a PhD in ethnic studies with a designated emphasis in women, gender, and sexuality from the University of California at Berkeley. Born in Mexico and raised in Chula Vista, she is blessed to return to these borderlands to work and raise her family. Her scholarship and teaching largely draws on decolonial feminism, curandera praxis, and women of color and Anzalduan theory. As part of her work furthering what she calls curandera scholar activism, Irena teaches a community engagement course, Storytelling to Transform Yourself and Transform the World, engaging the South San Diego County community that partners with California Latinas for Reproductive Justice, Casa Familiares, Youth Center, and Otay Mesa Detention Resistance. And she serves as faculty advisor for the Association of Chicana Activists. Dr. Lara's publications include the co-edited Fleshing the Spirit, Spirituality and Activism in Chicana, Latina, and Indigenous Women's Lives, and Women in Culture, an intersectional anthology of gender and women's studies. Welcome, Irena.
Thank you, Jill, and thank you to the panelists and all of the audience members. I'm trusting folks can hear me, but can I get like a thumbs up? Yes, okay. I'm gonna put the timer because when I start ad-libbing, there's so much to share, and I wanna make sure there's plenty of time for Q&A and discussion and to hear from the panelists. But I want to start by saying my desire in being with all of you today is to honor the legacy of Yolanda Lopez's erotic spirit. Through sharing my personal relationship to Yolanda's work, which I have meditated on, written about, and taught for 30 years, as well as keep learning from. And so by erotic spirit, I'm drawing from the work of Audre Lorde and Gloria Anzaldúa. One way that Gloria Anzaldúa defines spirit is spirit represents the zest for living, the energizing power for life. It is the inner voice, the electrical charge that says, I'm going to do it. I will do it. And that goes along with the idea of the erotic from Audre Lorde, who talks about the erotic as our life force, our ability to express what we're feeling, our sensuality, our inner being. And she says, quote, the sensual, those physical, emotional, and psychic expressions of what is deepest and strongest and richest within each of us. This is a resource of power and information in women's lives. So as I wrote in the essay for the exhibit catalog, it was Yolanda's artwork that initiated me into Chicana feminism. I was an undergraduate taking Chicano studies classes for the first time, and this was the early 1990s. And I wrote, quote, for the first time, I sensed that art had been created with someone like me, like the person I was becoming in heart and mind. Next slide. So through Yolanda's rich visual language with her artworks and their loving focus on Chicana's bodies as sites of liberation, she helped me give voice to my own questions about identity, womanhood, community, and power, the power of knowledge and the power of our imaginations to create. Because I was figuring this out. There had to be another way to be human and free, right? In Rosario Castellanos' words, otro modo de ser humana y libre. And Yolanda Lopez's work helped me think about that, imagine the possibilities of that. Another way to be whole and self-possessed in our multiplicity, a way to be that recognizes that we are all related, right? So I felt Yolanda, especially in her self-portrait, I sensed her as an older, wiser, and definitely cooler older sister, a living ancestor. She continues to speak to me and the person I aspire to be in my everyday life in all of my roles, as an educator, as a mother, as a comadre, as a curanda scholar activist. Right? She's vibrant, self-possessed, fun, brave, a person who acts with dignity and grace. And at the same time that Yolanda Lopez uplifted herself as an individual and individual women, it was always in the context of creating community, right? And recognizing that we're part of a community of mujeres while being dedicated to political engagement and social justice. So when I spend time with Yolanda's work, I spend time with a deep thinker, a deep feeler, a brilliant artist who acknowledged that she came from this matriarchy of thinkers and feelers, but also simultaneously calls us to be critical, or to question, to resist the colonial patriarchal teachings that have also harmed us and have held us back. And it's both of that ability to hold both that continues to compel me. So I first met Yolanda via her internationally renowned Guadalupe series, including this triptych here, in my classrooms and through Chicana feminist writings, right? So writers, theorists like 𝘗𝘰𝘳𝘵𝘀𝘍𝘓, Iván Bejarano, and later Laura Perez, Norma Larcón, and Karen Mary Dávalos. Next slide. And then I met her in the periodicals room. We can go back to the triptych. This will be awesome. And then I met her in the periodicals room of my university library. And if you can kind of see here, this is the cover of Aslan, the Journal of Chicano Studies. And it was the only edition in 1993. So it was for a whole year in the periodicals room facing out. And as I write in the essay, it became a place that I stopped, when I'd go to the library to go read and study and do my homework. It became a ritual for me, a ceremonial place for me to gather myself and to connect and to know myself, remember myself as part of a community of mothers, of tías, of women's labor that has been necessary for me to even have been there at the university. And it began this relationship with myself that very directly linked me to this genealogy. I write in the piece. Did I write in the piece? Let me read real quickly from it. It said, I identified with Margaret Guadalupe's tired but enduring gaze, her sturdy body intent at work, and I was energized by her self-determination, sewing her own cosmic regalia, no less. She reminded me that indeed I am sacred, that I come from a lineage of ordinary, extraordinary mujeres. She invoked in me the conocimiento that I have a responsibility to bring dignity to my work as part of a community, wherever I am, whatever I do. So I physically met Yolanda Lopez in Mission Galeria de la Raza in San Francisco. And there she very generously gave me a tour of the artwork. So I was just in awe that she would actually be hanging out at a gallery. And I ran into her at a national, at NOX, a National Association of Chicano and Chicano Studies conference soon after. And I immediately was struck by her generous spirit, right? That she would spend time with someone answering, initial kind of basic questions. And also I got to see the way that she mentors and mentored other artists. And she introduced me to the artist Isis Rodriguez at the time, who was also working with reimagining the icon of La Virgen de Guadalupe. Later, I met her at Casa Joaquin, Chicano Latino sort of, space at UC Berkeley, where she gave us a presentation of her artwork using slides and a carousel with slides. And eventually it was her artwork that moved me to write an honors thesis and then a PhD on Latina spirituality and sexuality, and then subsequent scholarship, specifically focusing on the ways that we can heal the colonial patriarchal Western splits between our bodies, minds, and spirits. And specifically, the ways that her artwork helps us interrogate and identify the ways that we're taught to split ourselves, right? And to think critically about that good woman, bad woman, good mujer, bad mujer dichotomy, also known as the Virgen Puta dichotomy. To close, I want to share that a significant contribution to Chicana and decolonial feminist thought is Yolanda's insistence on fleshing the spirit and spiriting the flesh of actual women, mestiza and indigenous women, as well as calling us to engage with Mesoamerican iconography and worldviews, like Via Cuatlicue, that some of the imagery that Jill showed, called Nuestra Madre and Madre Mestiza, and the ways that this helps decolonize a singular, uncritical view of Our Lady of Guadalupe to help us reject the fallacy of subservient womanhood, of subservient motherhood, and reject the fallacy that we have to choose between being powerful erotic beings and passive spiritual beings. We can be sexual and spiritual and learn to express and cultivate our own erotic spirit. You can show the last slide. Yeah. So at the end of my essay, I share that that Guadalupe Tonantzin, that Yolanda Lopez literally has my back as well in my office. And when you enter my office, when I enter my office, it becomes another place for me to recognize my sacredness and my I don't know if you heard me at the end, but I was just saying that these images are literally in my office, and Yolanda Lopez, as well as Guadalupe Tonantzin, has my back, reminding me of my sacred purpose as an educator that does liberatory work at the university and beyond. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Irena. That was so beautiful. And we only lost the last part of what you had said, so thank you for repeating that. And I'm excited to next introduce Teresita Romo, who is a lecturer and affiliate faculty in the Chicano Studies Department at UC Davis. An art historian, she has published extensively on Chicano art, most recently as a contributor to the Smithsonian American Art Museum exhibition catalog, Printing the Revolution, The Rise and Impact of Chicano Graphics, 1965 to now. She's the author of the artist monograph, Malaquias Montoya, as well as the co-editor of the Chicano and Chicana Art, a critical anthology, of Chicano and Chicana Art, a critical anthology. Romo has served as chief curator at the Mexican Museum in San Francisco, arts director at the National Museum of Mexican Art in Chicago, and the arts project coordinator and senior researcher at the UCLA Chicano Studies Research Center. An independent curator, she has organized numerous exhibitions, including Reframing Comunidad, the art of 𝘗𝘳𝘕𝘠𝘕 and 𝘗𝘰𝘳𝘢𝘪𝘵 Salvamando at the National Museum of Mexican Art, which just closed. And she's the co-curator of Traitor Survivor Icon, The Legacy of La Malinche at the Denver Art Museum, opening in 2022. Welcome, Tere.
Thank you, Jill. I want to honor the original peoples of Sacramento, the Nisenan, Maidu, and Miwok. I met Yolanda in the early 1980s at the Galeria La Raza in San Francisco. Over the years, we kept in contact, but it was not until the early 2000s when I was at the UCLA Chicano Studies Research Center overseeing the 𝘗𝘗𝘵𝘪𝘴𝘵 artist monograph series that we were able to reconnect. Slide. I would travel often to SF to see her. We would walk to her favorite Chinese restaurant and not only discussed her monograph, but also shared news regarding Chicano, Chicana art, especially the younger artists that she was excited about. More recently, I interviewed her for my essay on Chicano graphics for the Smithsonian American Art Museum's Printing the Revolution catalog. Even as she was battling cancer, she answered my calls with my many questions, which became long weekly conversations about Chicana art, gender politics, and especially her concept of art as image making. She would always thank me for calling her. Next slide. In thinking about my presentation for today, I reflected on how throughout Yolanda's art career of image making, her feminism and political activism were one and the same. She was able to overcome the schism between Chicanas who dealt with racism and poverty, along with sexism, and the largely middle class and upper class Anglo-feminist movement. She practiced her own brand of feminism, one that allowed her to conceive the iconic Virgin of Guadalupe series, as well as to create powerful political posters. Yolanda saw them all as an extension of her Chicana feminist agenda, including the 1978 offset print that was a masterful merger of aesthetics, politics, and her feminism. Since its creation, Who's the Illegal Alien Pilgrim has circulated widely, sold at national Chicano conferences beginning in the 1980s. It has been reproduced on flyers, buttons, and even t-shirts. Today, accelerated by internet access, it has continued to influence generation of artists as well as activists. The poster was developed from a collage that you can see here and designed for the Committee on Chicano Rights, an organization directed by Herman Baca in San Diego. It was part of their campaign regarding immigration rights and in response to President Jimmy Carter's immigration plan, which called for constructing a wall along the US-Mexico border, granting different degrees of amnesty to undocumented persons, and issuing worker identification cards. Next. The poster was printed in 1978, the same year that she created the Virgen de Guadalupe series as part of her MFA at UC San Diego. But the illegal alien print was not included. Quote, because I knew if I inserted that part of the work I did within graduate school, they would not have passed me. They would have cut me off. So I had the wisdom to realize that I was just, I love the word, sub rosa, under the table, end quote. Next. In 1981, Yolanda reworked the design by adding a frame around the central figure, centering the text on the chest and deleting references to the CCR, as well as including her name. In collaboration with the Galeria La Raza, she reprinted the posters, and the most recent version was printed in 1994. The main image in all the versions is this Aztec warrior shown from the waist up with a confrontational stance and an angry expression. His left hand with its pointed finger seems to move forward. piercing the page while his other hand crumples paper with the words immigration plans visible at the top. A question is prominent over his chest. Who's the illegal alien pilgrim? The warrior's stance was inspired by an ad, next slide, for a Mexican beer ad, as well as a picture of an Azteca dancer in National Geographic, but it also recalls the recruitment poster seen here by James Montgomery Flagg that featured an old bearded Uncle Sam, also with a pointed finger, ordering young men to join the army. Subconsciously, in mimicking this recognizable print, she's giving her poster official, almost governmental authority. Her confrontational question asks, who are the illegal aliens, especially to the ancestors, especially for the descendants of Americans who arrived, of Europeans who arrived from Europe, also without papers, for example, on the Pilgrim's Mayflower. And by utilizing a man indigenous to the Americas, she ties all Mexicans, including the undocumented and Mexican Americans and Chicanos, to this continent. Yolanda once stated that, quote, "My art is driven by love, rage, and a sense of irony," end quote. Next slide. I would add wit, which can be seen in the way she used an element of humor in what is a political statement, but also as a means, in her word, quote, "to share a wicked laugh, giggle, that also acknowledges our smarts and our deep well of courage," end quote. With its sparse yet bold imagery, strategic use of uppercase lettering, and striking black and white composition, she layered political, cultural, and racial references onto a potent statement. Next slide. With its proud, assured indigenous figure and assertive text, the poster continues to resonate with young Chicanos, Latinos. As one can see in this photo sharing webpage, the poster was transformed into a coloring book page by a young fan, Maya Escobar. What is more telling is her posted statement, which I would like to read. Quote, "When I was 10, my family went to DC to protest Proposition 187, a ballot initiative designed to prevent undocumented workers and their families from receiving social services, healthcare, and public education. I remember feeling so excited, so happy to be part of a movement, so honored to partake in an action that could result in social change. In the midst of a sea of faces, a whirlwind of colors, and the sound of drums beating faintly behind the rally cry, Si se puede, Yolanda Lopez's poster jumped out at me. It was so simple, it was silly, and it made so much sense. Everyone was holding the same poster. Everyone had access to the same message," end quote. Along with the Mexican-American Chicano viewers, the poster is also meant for a general audience, as evident in its conscious use of English, along with the Uncle Sam reference. In calling for change in the discourse around who belongs here and who doesn't, Yolanda sought to disrupt the negative dynamics of the national immigration debate, as well as expose its racist underpinnings. Next. Unfortunately, we're still dealing with the same divisive manipulation and failed policies that surface each time an easy political scapegoat is needed. One only needs to look and you can find the same reactive and reductive rhetoric as is evident in this very telling internet example, which makes use of Yolanda's poster to substantiate claims of, quote, "Raza group's hatred for the US," end quote. Though posted more than a decade ago, it's still available, and its rhetoric lives on as part of recent efforts, such as the Arizona and Texas laws to eliminate Chicano and Chicana study programs. Next. However, over the last few years, there has been greater attention on Yolanda and her art. This exhibition and the panel being examples of this. Last year, the Who's the Illegal Alien print was also featured in the Smithsonian's American Art Museum Printing the Revolution. I revel in the irony that Yolanda's so-called, quote, "symbol of hatred of the US" is now included and being exhibited as American art by a national institution that will expose it to Americans of all races and show them the breadth and power of her art. Next, I end with this quote that adds another layer to her unique feminist perspective and to our understanding of the poster. As an intellect and artist, Yolanda recognized the importance of image making, of art in our society with its onslaught of visual media that bombards us daily. She believed that artists have the power to transform individuals and thereby change society. Thus, she combined her multifaceted artistic practice to create artworks that attract viewers, then challenge, incite, and/or inspire and empower them. As a feminist, her decision to have a male warrior as the central figure and messenger of an important question was based on her belief in a feminism in which Chicanas and Chicanos could not only question patriarchy and racism, but also work together to shape a better and more just future. That is what I believe is her artistic power and impact. She believed that her role as an artist was not to stand outside of society or history, but to assume the responsibility to shape both, to create an art that serves others rather than seek individual validation. Her stance may not have gotten her gallery representation, museum exhibitions, or tenured positions, but it's one that has and will continue to influence and inspire future generations of artists. And for that, I am very grateful. Thank you, Yolanda.
And thank you, Teresita. I'm happy to next introduce Leticia Gomez Franco, who is an arts administrator, advocate, and cultural producer. Her work is rooted in the intersection of culture, representation, and social justice, all values that play a role in her position as executive director of the Balboa Art Conservation Center. She previously served as senior arts and culture funding manager for the city of San Diego, where she led the city's arts and culture funding program, oversaw the development and implementation of professional development, technical assistance, and capacity building to incubate and build capacity of artists and arts and culture organizations, and supported the department's diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Before that, Gomez Franco served as director of programs for the New Americans Museum, where she supported the grand opening of the Immigrant Narratives-based institution and led curatorial efforts. Her career in arts began as executive director for Casa Familiares The Front, a collaborative of arts, culture, design, and urbanism, where she oversaw development and program management for multiple art spaces, as well as headed a rigorous and culturally conscious exhibition calendar with a commitment to local arts, diversity, and community empowerment. She holds a Bachelor's of Arts degree from the University of California, Berkeley in English and Chicano Studies, and a Master of Arts in Curatorial Theory from San Diego State University's Liberal Arts and Science program. She's also a two-time fellow of the National Association of Latino Arts and Culture Leadership Institute. Leticia remains steadfast in her commitment to use her experience in arts administration, development, marketing, and curating to increase access to the arts for all communities. Welcome, Leticia.
Thank you very much, Jill. Thank you for the invitation to join you today, and thank you to my fellow panelists for the opportunity as well to commune with you in the celebration of Yolanda's legacy. I am also joining you from Kumeyaay lands, colonially known as Chula Vista, and also taking a page from Yolanda's book, quite literally inside of my altar. I wiggled a chair into here, and I gotta say that I get it. Inserting ourselves and our bodies into our moments of praise and our relics of both ancestry, but also future visions for ourselves and our peoples is really important. And I hadn't done it before tonight, but I'm liking this energy, so this is good. I had a really hard time committing to an idea or a theme for this talk. I tried drafting it out, and at like page 5,675, I was like, nope, I'm not gonna be able to say this in 5 minutes. The truth is, I can talk for days or years about Yolanda Lopez, and over the past couple of months, as I've tried to put my thoughts together, I realized how much I had taken her for granted. I can't even try to summarize her impact on me or separate where her practice became my life's theory, because my entire life, my entire adult life, turns out, has been an homage to her. I'll mention briefly that I first came across Yolanda's work at my time of birth, not my biological birth, my second birth, when I came to be me, the one I am today, the birth of my Chicana consciousness. It was my first year of undergrad at Cal in 𝘗𝘪𝘳𝘵𝘳𝘥𝘢𝘪𝘵's Chicana art history class. She introduced me to Yolanda's work. We talked about her use of the body as nation. When I became a Chicana, I jumped straight into Chicana feminism, and all of it was rooted in the ideas Yolanda explored in her work. I'd come across Yolanda's work again in all my other classes. In Lara Perez's class, we read Norma Alarcón and contextualized Yolanda's work with a lesson about agency in her Traductora Traditora text, which is a text I keep close as I navigate historically white serving spaces. In Norma Alarcón's class, we analyzed the 𝘗𝘪𝘳𝘵𝘪𝘴𝘵. In Carla Trujillo's class, we used 𝘗𝘫 teachings on collective consciousness, and in 𝘗𝘫 class, explored Yolanda's work as groundings of home. All of that to say, this entire last 15 seconds was a successful attempt to name drop the roster of Chicana royalty I counted on as my maestras at Cal. In all those classes, I came to immerse myself deeper in Chicana feminist theory, and in all the ways we summoned Yolanda's work, I found myself. I developed a vision for my future self, carved a path out for me that was completely and entirely influenced by the force Yolanda unleashed into the world when she produced the body of work we are here to celebrate her for. The power and influence of these cultural moments and the theory that followed was such that I spent my undergrad years challenging all the things, reclaiming myself, and scheming with my comrades about the cultural centers we'd run and the spaces we'd claim. After Cal, I moved to the border where I helped launch The Front, a community art space part of Casa Familiar in San Isidro. One of my proudest accomplishments is having been involved with the birth of Día de la Mujer in 2008, an all-women's show, a sanctuary. I had the honor of curating that program for the first 7 years of its existence. It's still going strong today and celebrating its 15th year this very Saturday in San Isidro. After that, I'd go on to help curate Día de la Mujer shows at the Centro Cultural de la Raza, the Chicana exhibition for Chicana tributes, Shoulders to Stand On, at the Women's Museum of California, and finally, Ni Solo Mujeres, intersecting Chicana identities at Southwestern College. This was the show that featured Yolanda Lopez's work. I reached out to Yolanda via Facebook and told her my dreams to take the exhibit out of the Women's Museum and into the community. I wasn't expecting a response. At this time, Yolanda lived in my altar. I had seen her the year before at the Women's Museum and wondered what she was doing out of her glass pedestal and why she was roaming around mere mortals. For me, Yolanda was just always larger than life and a symbol for the work that I wanted to commit to myself and the person that I wanted to be. So I wasn't expecting a response. But lo and behold, she responded, most excited about the engagement of the community in the South Bay. She said she wanted to talk person to person, keep it simple and plain speaking, and that she didn't like it when people made a fuss about her. That she felt that we shared many values and she wanted to support me. She said she wanted to share photographs she had taken of Las Santas Locas, a self-possessed and distinctly fashionable group of young women she had photographed in San Francisco, and a couple weeks later had shipped out to me 2 signed black and white prints from her series. The works became the anchor of the exhibit. The image that you see here is from that exhibition, and her support helped me draw a roster of artists that understood the sanctity of being in Yolanda's company. The exhibition featured 11 artists, 3 from the Bay Area, Yolanda, Melanie Cervantes, and Cristo Galindo, 3 from the LA area, Shizu Saldamando, Carolyn Castaño, and Angélica Becerra, and 4 from the San Diego, Tijuana area, Berenice Vadillo, Patricia Aguayo, Alessandra Moctezuma, and Panca. And a special feature of Rotmi Enciso, the feminist photographer from Mexico City who had taken the popular photo of the woman carrying the Ni Santas Ni Putas Solo Mujeres protest sign that is so celebrated by Chicana feminists, but rarely attributed to 𝘗𝘳𝘵𝘳𝘠𝑚𝑖. She actually came down and was part of our panel and was surprised herself in a very similar way as Yolanda often was, to find out that she was, that her work was held so high and that we had all kind of embraced it as a symbol of our revolution, while they kind of just considered themselves regular old human beings. The exhibition was featured on Remezcla, Me Too, Latina Magazine, and as awesome as all of that was, the most special part of it was having Yolanda visit the exhibit, which she was in town for a presentation at UCSD, coincidentally the day after it opened. I attended that presentation along with Alessandra and Jenny Armour from Mesa Art Gallery. And after the talk, in which she was unapologetically reflecting on her struggles, being the only woman of color in the visual arts department at UCSD and having to force a space and place for herself where everything was a constant reminder that she did not belong, we drove her down to Chula Vista to see the exhibition. She loved the show. She was excited about the artist by the way that we pushed and challenged notions of identity, how each artist presented their own Chicanidad in a way that almost contradicted the last, leaving no room for definitions, just experiences, no permissions, no apologies, just us in all our glory. I thought a lot about the entire world that had transpired between when I first came across the portrait of the artist and the moment Yolanda walked into Southwestern Gallery to bear witness to the galaxies we had created with the language she had given us. When I look back at my life's work, I can no longer separate my journey from the collective consciousness of my maestras before me and my colegas beside me. We've modeled our work spiritually, professionally, culturally, and personally, claimed space and reclaimed culture, challenged, redefined, and existed in opposition to the expected because we live inspired by her work. Yolanda created her Guadalupe series in 1978. In her artist statement for her MFA, and thank you, Jill, for including that in the catalog because I actually hadn't read it in its entirety before. She wrote, "The time is here, and as Chicanas, we must act on our own behalf. We need to develop a visual and verbal language to fully express our needs." It would be almost 10 years before the Guadalupe series would receive the significant exposure we now know it for. We didn't even have a language to contextualize her work with at the time, but that language came. 45 years after Yolanda's MFA show, all of the women sitting here in this panel are engaged in, living in, and further developing that language. And we are in an eternal state of construction, making space for ourselves and each other to exist unapologetically on our terms. This is Yolanda's legacy. I visited Yolanda's exhibit at MCASD the other day to spend some time with my 5,675 pages worth of feelings and commune with the work one last time before this panel. I had feelings of sadness and regret and failure for not having done more while Yolanda was still with us. As Chicanas, our entire identities are founded on resistance, but resistance is exhausting. To live our lives in constant opposition, to know that our mere presence disturbs and disrupts is exhausting. I thought about Yolanda and the last time I saw her. I wonder if she looked back at 45 years of work and found herself depleted and exhausted. I expected all of these feelings, all of that tiredness to manifest during that visit to her exhibition. Instead, I found peace. The Yolandas were not standing in defiance or resistance. The works were not juxtaposed with anything. We're not being challenged, no patriarchy, no racial hierarchy, no religious constraints. The Yolandas in that gallery finally truly had a space of their own. And it wasn't just limited to the walls of that room, of that gallery, that museum, or this city. The space inhabited wasn't just about place. It was also about time. In the here and the now, these seminal works that ignited generations of Chicana identity live as part of a much, much larger narrative and also exist within the microcosm that is Yolanda. Just Yolanda, in all her multiplicities, and all that she claimed as her own, all the Yolandas, her, us, running, smiling, existing in peace and joy. No exhaustion, no resistance, as if when they set out on their run, en Adonde Iba la Chicana was here and now.
Thank you so much, Leticia. I'm going to next introduce Jessica Sabogal, who, let's have the next slide. Thank you. Jessica Sabogal is a contemporary Colombian American muralist from San Francisco, California, is best known for her stencil, street, and poster art over the last decade. Sabogal travels the world creating to urgently document and purposefully disrupt spaces that preclude and exclude her larger-than-life murals by portraying profiles of queer, Black, Indigenous, and trans women of color, youth, family, herself, and members of her community. By erecting her own monuments, she is present in all of the layers of creation, performing research on the painting subject, preparing all of the necessary materials, organizing a team to put up the art, celebrating the message, and once it is out in the world, protecting it. Her murals have been commissioned by Facebook, Google, 20th Century Fox, the University of Southern California, the University of California, San Francisco, CSU San Marcos, the University of Arizona, and the University of Utah, among many others. Sabogal's work has since been featured in national and international news, including CNN, the Wall Street Journal, the Huffington Post, and the New York Times. Welcome, Jessica.
Okay, I think I was muted. All right. So first, I just want to say thank you, Jill, for having me on this panel today. I know that there could have been, 1,000 people that could have been on this panel that would have loved to speak about their relationship with Yolanda, and I just feel so lucky that I get to tell my story. As Jill said, my name is Jessica Sabogal, and I'm a first-generation Colombian American muralist and printmaker. I was born in San Francisco, and I'm coming to you all live today from Ohlone territory, otherwise known as Oakland, California. I'm approaching about a decade of working as a full-time artist, most of which Yolanda has played a huge role in the development of my career. I believe in life that we only get a few soulmates to connect with, throughout our lives. And Yolanda was certainly one of them for me. She embodied so many different people to me. She embodied my mother, my grandmother, my friend, my teacher. And then because of the beauty of the cycle of life, in the end, she also became my child. So in this short talk here today, I'm going to talk with you all about our personal relationship and then what led me to create my own monument to Yolanda. Next slide. So this is a picture of me and Yolanda the first day that we met back in 2013. And I just think that this is so special because it's so rare to be able to pinpoint the exact moment that you met somebody. And let alone have it photographed. We met because Ani Rivera, the executive director of Galería de la Raza, had the foresight to pair us in leading a group of high school students to paint Galeria's historic billboard, which is there behind us. We came on site that day to assess the wall and take measurements and see the work that had to be done. And I just love this photo so much because the pose was her idea, and she, the fact that we're holding hands, she wasn't above me, she treated me as her equal. And even on this day, I think I had one mural under my belt at this point. I was a nobody, and she treated me with respect and kindness and valued what I had to say. Next slide. So this is a picture of part of the mural at what would be my first ever unveiling ceremony. These are some of the students that helped us complete the mural. And on the right side of the mural, Yolanda said a speech that day. And she gave it to me. I scanned it for this talk so that you guys can see it. But in this speech, she tells me that I have what it takes to make it as an artist, that my tools for disruption in spray paint and stencils are important. And basically that she saw me and to keep going, you know, and I feel like as young queer people, as young like daughters of immigrants, like we don't have a lot of mentors, we don't have a lot of heroes, you know, and so to have somebody like Yolanda tell me like, keep going, your point of view matters, was just so, you know, I look back and it was just such a monumental moment at the beginning of my career. Next slide. So after this, we really just became, you know, buds. I would go to her apartment a lot and she would have these, like, this is like a binder of, you know, just her thoughts, her ideas, her sketches. You know, when I first saw this, I was like, oh my God, like this is the sketch that you used, you know, for your most famous work of your mom. Like that's amazing. You just have this like laying around the house. And then on the left here, we have, you know, one of her, you know, incredible portraits that would then go on to be a reference photo for her self-portrait. Next slide. You know, and this was, you know, literally weeks before she passed, and she still was so gracious enough to have a group of us over and share her stories and make us laugh. And here she's showing us again more of those like original photographs, the original, you know, negatives that would later go on to become her masterpieces. Next slide. This was a few years ago, but Yolanda called me kind of in a panic. The Guadalupe's had been stored for so long in her room that she didn't remember their condition. So she told me to come over and ask me if I could unpack them. Next slide. So luckily, you know, when we unboxed everything, you know, of course they were okay. They were in perfect, pristine condition. And here she is, you know, showing me every detail of this work of her grandma, pointing out, this is what this means, this is what this means. And on the one hand, it was just sort of like I was floating above my body. Like I couldn't believe that I was here with these works of art that I had only read about in magazines or in books, or like had only seen pictures of on the internet, you know? So I was feeling that. And then I was also feeling like, these are your masterpieces, you know, why aren't we in some, you know, like air conditioned, temperature controlled, you know, archive that's like high level security to get into, you know? She shouldn't have to be the one to worry about the condition of her master works, you know? And in this photo, this was in the early stages of the planning for the show, and Jill came up with her team to see what Yolanda had. And even then, you know, we were unrolling these like incredible works that, you know, I was seeing for the first time. And even then we were still like working out of Yolanda's basement. And so I say all of this because to be so close to Yolanda and to know her and her work so well, I always felt this deep sense of profound injustice. She was so smart and so ahead of her time that I feel like she was punished for it. It was so clear how the patriarchy and racism were at play within institutions and in academia that she was never able to truly like reap the benefits of her work. I feel that institutions failed her. You know, they didn't choose to value her yet, or to acquire her yet, or to preserve her work yet, you know, or even let her teach. And it hurts my heart, and it still hurts my heart, you know. So to push back against this reality, I have put her in my artwork all throughout my career. I don't have a lot of, you know, power or control, but I felt like, you know, I at least have the power to do this and to amplify like Yolanda and her voice and her image, like as best I could. So this is a project from way early back in the days, back in 2015. And I was allowed to photograph folks up and down the Mission Street corridor to tell their stories and interview them and put their photos on the muni buses all over the city. So here's a photograph of Yolanda on the back of the minibus. Next slide. Here is here is a painting that I did that was a commission for Google. Way early, again, I'm embarrassed to even show you guys because my style hadn't been developed yet, but I'm like working it out, you know, and they asked me to make a painting on, you know, on mission life. And to me, what I thought was most important was, you know, these women that either through knowing them directly or indirectly or through walking in and out of the Galeria, like these women were my art school, you know. So from left to right, we have Viva Paredes, we have Olga Talamante, we have Juana Alicia, Sheree Moraga, we have Yolanda there in the middle, we got Amalia Mesa Baines, we got Lorraine, we got Carmen, we got Esther Hernandez, we got Celia Herrera Rodriguez. Yeah, next slide. And even as I grew up and I matured more in my style, and I got more confident in my artwork and started doing bigger buildings and everything like that. I started experimenting with collage and having different photographs of my family and different like life events that happened to me in the backgrounds of my works. And so here on the right, we have a screen print that I did back in 2020 and a self-portrait there that I did on the left in the same year. And I show these because Yolanda's imagery and portraiture is just infused all up in the back of these. Next slide. But this was never enough for me. You know, I imagined Yolanda like on the side of a freaking skyscraper in New York. Like I wanted her image like huge, you know. Me doing those little things wasn't enough, and I made it like I wanted it to be like on my bucket list of life that this is something that I would do, like not only for me and not only for our community, but like for Yolanda. I wanted her to be able to see herself on like a massive scale. So when I was forwarded this call for proposals, there was a new affordable housing complex that was being put up in the Mission that was being built back in 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic. And I knew that even though I would have to beat out a bunch of the big, you know, male graffiti artists to have to get it, and that even if I did get it, I would have to have all my subject matter approved. Like I felt in my bones that I would get it and that Yolanda would be up there. Next slide. And so for scale, that's my partner and I working on the fourth wall there. And so this is the completion of that mural. It's composed of 4 30-foot by 60-foot murals in the Mission District of San Francisco, which from interview process to the actual painting of the mural took about 1.5 years. Next slide. The slide before, please. So this mural was not only meant to honor Yolanda, but all the stories and revolutionary groups that she taught me about in the late 1960s, in 1969 in particular, some of which she was actually a part of. These include, but are not limited to, Los Siete de la Raza, the Black Panther Party, the Native American occupation of Alcatraz, the Third World Liberation Front, and third wave feminism. Next slide. So she taught me about all these movements and their relationship to one another. And I felt it was my responsibility as an artist to not only honor her, which was way overdue, but the oral histories that she also left to me about all these groups. You know, I'm from San Francisco and I had never heard about any of these like movements growing up in any of my schools. Next slide. As you can see, there's two of my crew members, Elizabeth Blancas and Paula de la Calle, working on the Basta Ya there. And I included Basta Ya as a nod to Los Siete de la Raza. Next slide. Which were 7 Central American youths wrongfully framed for shooting a police officer, which led to an 18-month trial and eventual acquittal. The mission rallied behind them. And during this time, the mission came together to create all these like social programs. So there was a free breakfast program, a free Centro de Salud clinic, a workers restaurant, a legal aid and immigration support storefront, and of course the Basta Ya, which Yolanda was responsible for all the iconography and graphics that went into the movement. Next slide. We ask to this day, what does solidarity look like? And Yolanda always told me about the help that the Black Panther Party extended to Los Siete. So, you know, the Panthers had their own newspaper that reached 150,000 people, and they gave free ad space to the Basta Ya crew to be able to, you know, generate their ideas and their message more broadly. Another thing that I didn't know was that the Panthers let Los Siete use their lawyer for the trial. Next slide. Yolanda also taught me about the occupation of Alcatraz, a 2-year-long protest when 89 Native folks of different tribes came together and reclaimed Alcatraz Island. At the height of the occupation, there was 400 people, and there was also a school, a daycare, and a health clinic. So the photo on the left here was taken during the occupation, and I loved the Indian line graffiti above their heads. And on the right here, of course, is Yolanda's famous Femme magazine cover from Mexico City, where she shortened the Virgen's cloak and gave her feet with which to walk and do the things that she needed to get done. She always like told me that the Virgen like needed to go around, like do her duties and like do her things. And it was and continues to be a symbol for women's liberation. Next slide. So I took the original graffiti from Alcatraz and Yolanda's Virgen and added my own twist to it by adding mola prints from Colombia, where my family is from, in her dress and in the upside down American flag behind her as a symbol of indigenous resistance. Next slide. And the last thing I want to say is that this mural was the hardest project that I've ever worked on in my life. There was so much pushback at every stage of the work. I have never fought harder to have anything approved, and probably had it not been for Ani Rivera Galeria, this mightn't have happened. But in the end, it didn't matter because Yolanda got to see herself up there, you know, for this, I'm so grateful. She passed away 4 months after its completion, and on the day of, we were able to gather under the mural and just be in mourning together, you know. Yeah, I don't know. I want you all to know that like the day that she passed, like she was surrounded by so much love and her community and her friends and her family, and we miss her so much. So love you, Yolanda.
Thank you so much, Jessica. We're running long tonight, but we started late, so we're just going to let this go and have the discussion after our last speaker. But I want to introduce Sara Solomani. Sara is a doctoral candidate in art history, theory, and criticism at UCSD's Department of Visual Arts. Her current research focuses on the work of performance artists of Mexican roots in the United States between the 1960s Culture War era and NAFTA between 1968 and 1994. Sara's work highlights artistic interrogations of geopolitical and metaphorical borders that deconstruct our understanding of space in the age of global capital, and identifies critical questions about identity in a compartmentalized world. In particular, she's interested in using her writing to distinguish the often conflated histories of Chicanics performance art of the 1960s and 70s and border art in the 1980s and 90s, paying particular attention to the problematic category Latino. Sara's advocacy includes translation and interpretation for political asylum seekers and survivors of domestic violence detained in private immigration prisons. In 2011, she graduated from the Department of Chicana and Chicano Studies at SDSU with a master's thesis on the multidimensional questioning of transporter space by Marcos Ramirez-Pere. She has published and presented several texts and curated exhibitions on the historical relationship between politics, geopolitics, and art on the Tijuana-San Diego border and in Mexico. Sara currently teaches writing, art history, and Chicano studies at UCSD and SDSU. Welcome, Sara.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Jill. I'd like to begin by thanking Yolanda for her incredible contribution to the Chicanx community, the POC arts community, and to advancing the fields of art, art history, ethnic studies, and others through her work. And also for inspiring me personally on a very deep level in my work. I also want to thank my fellow panelists. I've enjoyed listening to your talks and even gotten emotional tonight. I want to thank you, Jill, for your respectful approach and well-considered research on this exhibition and the programming at the city's main art institution, MCASD. I think it's important to have a project like this there. I wish to second Jill and Leticia's Indigenous land acknowledgement and to deliver my presentation in the spirit and from the territory of matriarchy, a space from which Yolanda approached her own practice and also an important part of Indigenous history under perpetual erasure. So this is something that resonates with me personally as coming from a matriarchy myself. To me and many others, Yolanda is refusal of historical erasure, an unapologetic force of auto-identification, a return of the colonial gaze, a warrior of the working class, an infiltration into the politics of translation, a critical Chicana misfit in the whitewashed California art world, a ruckus in spaces of white liberal feminism, a radical mother. Departing from her Chicana matriarchal territory, Yolanda made the Guadalupe series. Let me see. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you. Sorry. Yolanda made the Guadalupe series during her time as the only woman of color MFA student at the UCSD Department of Visual Arts in the late 70s, as many of my colleagues have mentioned here. Sitting here as the only woman of color single mother in the PhD program at UCSD's Visual Arts department for the better part of the last decade, her experience and the department, her experience in the department resonates closely with my own, and I've had a chance to talk to her about that, which I was very grateful for. Yolanda, unapologetic about the autobiographical framing of her work, showed this triptych in her MFA exhibition at UCSD, depicting her grandmother, mother, and herself as Guadalupe. Here, Yolanda is reclaiming the archetype to a non-religious working class context in the very political space of the domestic, redirecting Marianismo, or the male or masculine veneration of the Virgin, as matriarchy here. And we'll circle back to look at some of her studies for this work in a minute. But first, I'd like to show a picture of the dress. You could go to the next slide, that her mother, Margaret, made for her to wear at her MFA show. And this was the Guadalupe dress that she wore. And if we can go to the next slide, I have a couple of photos of her life growing up in Logan. I think it's important to note here, we have this meta photograph of a photograph that's happening. It's a photo of Yolanda's family. It's a photo of Yolanda's family pictured on the altar of the Día de la Virgen de Guadalupe, which is the day that marks the day that Guadalupe appeared to Juan Diego on Tepeyac Hill in 1531. And as I'll explain in a moment, it's important to know that this is also the place of worship of the goddess Tonantzin. I'm giving in my talk here a little bit of historical and cosmological background, as I feel that maybe it's my duty as the art historian on the panel to do this. So a couple of her images of early portraits next, in the next slide. Oh, here's more families of her picture. More pictures of her family, I'm sorry. Last panelist. All right, so here are some images of her early works, her early studies in portraiture. The first is an image from 1955, and we can see some of her early studies of which her grandmother was often the subject or the sitter. Moving to the next slide. Here are some more images here of Victoria Franco, Yolanda's grandmother. So these are from 1974. Next slide. So here are some of Yolanda's studies for the Guadalupe series, including experimentations with multimedia collage, transparencies, and Xerox, grafting Guadalupe's manto as a dispositive frame around the images of ideal or idealized female subjects of the Italian Renaissance, such as Botticelli's Venus and Leonardo's Madonna. Continuing this research, Yolanda would later come to explore 𝘗𝘓𝘓𝘕 and Tonantzin's relationship to Guadalupe in her work. You can read further on this in the Tonantzin Guadalupe, and its application to Yolanda's work in Irene Lara's text in the show catalog. Here in Nuestra Madre, we can see, and I just want to give a bit of background, a bit of contextualization to these images. So in Aztec cosmology, 𝘗𝘓𝘓𝘓 is the mother of the gods and goddesses who was ordered to be sacrificed by her own children, led by an army of her children, led by the moon goddess, her daughter 𝘗𝘓𝘓𝘕𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓. And this was for having violated the birth order and having another child when she was not supposed to have anymore. She's in the very same moment there avenged by the god of war, Huitzilopochtli, who springs from her womb in full armor, ready to avenge his mother by killing his siblings. And it's important and relevant to note here that when archaeologists first unearthed the 𝘗𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓 monolith in Mexico in 1790, it was so terrifying and abject to them that they buried it back up, right? And not to be unearthed again for hundreds of years. So here this represents, right, the illegible, the white fear of the abject or the primitive other, right? Thinking about the refusal of the noble savage paradigm in the very object embodied in the monolith in the stone, but also everything that represents spiritually. And so this is symbolic, this is very important and also symbolic and inspiring in Yolanda's work, refusing to sort of make itself legible or translate itself to a traditional, in specific patriarchal white male gaze, right? Thinking about the reversal of the politics of the gaze. And so in a way unconquerable, right? In versions of Nuestra Madre, Yolanda represented 𝘗𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓 as Guadalupe, joining the discourse of the indigenous reclaiming of Guadalupe. And here surrounded by ironic little vignettes of the official Catholic Marian apparition story, right? That Guadalupe is simply the apparition of the Virgin Mary speaking in Nahuatl, Nahuatl to the indigenous Mexicanos, Mexica people at the time. But something greater than that, right? Reminding us that the colonial versions of history are not to be trusted. Next slide. I think it's also important to identify Yolanda's differential consciousness formation in her life's work, as many others of my fellow panelists have pointed at. I'd like to spend a few minutes here talking about the influence of political print culture from the era of the separatist movements, which Jess was commenting on. And if we move to the next slide. Here, 𝘗𝘰𝘳𝘵𝘀 de la raza. As I won't repeat the history, as Jess already went through the history of this group that were wrongfully incarcerated for 1.5 years and put through trial. Here, Yolanda is with members of the 𝘗𝘰𝘳𝘵 de la raza committee, and she was responsible for so much fundraising and, down to making the posters for the events and being present at the events and organizing the events. Yolanda was very active in this movement. Her collages and posters in support of 𝘗𝘰𝘳𝘵 against militarization and gentrification of her own city, in solidarity with Central American women, Black Panthers, farm workers, and the counterculture, together for us paint a picture of where Yolanda's feminism resides. And we can think about all of the solidarity that Yolanda lived and from which she practiced. Solidarity with victims of imperialist war, solidarity with others, solidarity with members of the Central American and Vietnamese communities, right? And with Central American women, Black Panthers, farm workers, the counterculture, and all of these others that I mentioned. Here, just to mark an example of the influence of print culture in Yolanda's own practice, we see Emory Douglas's work, which was widely published in the Black Panther, which was an important influence for Yolanda. And then moving to the next slide. Here are some of the posters about women's work, again, that I think frame very accurately, that really embody Yolanda's feminism, that we might even venture to say was a militant separatist in ways, feminism, right? And strategically and tactically sort of aligning itself with different political causes. Next slide, please. And so my favorite series of Yolanda is Las Santas Locas, the photographic series from 1979 of the Women's Car Club from San Francisco, from the Mission District. And I want to close here by just talking a little bit about these images, and you can move through them as I read the rest of this text. I only have a few, so move slowly, please. So we can see in this intimate yet empowering photographic expression, bringing the viewer into a position of guest vis-a-vis the subjects of these photographs, how it contributes to a reversal of the gaze, right? Undirected, but unsettlingly direct, not worried about you because they have each other's backs, in control of the code, right? And with these camera angles, which were from the bottom up, right, angled up, from undirecting, the undirected gazes and expressions on the women's faces, the candid quality of some of these photographs, and the choice, to do them in black and white, which really captures a sort of, besides the timelessness, it definitely captures something about the contrast of these women's sharp return of the gaze, which traditionally we think about when we think about images of women in art. The most common one is the nude female body, and more often than not, it's younger nude women as subjects of much older European artists. And the stories about some of the relationships between those artists and some of those sitters, right, would shock some who commonly see these artworks in their mainstream art institutions of their city. So here we see a reversal of that gaze and of that politics of that gaze, which is very important contribution of Yolanda's work. And so as Leti mentioned, she founded started the Día de la Mujer exhibition series at the front, for which she helped build up and create all this amazing programming for over the past decades. And I was fortunate enough to be invited to curate the Día de la Mujer exhibition in 2020, for which I was able to get back in touch with Yolanda after having met her for the first time in 2017 at that same talk that Leticia mentioned at UCSD. And so I was able to include a couple of these photographs in the Día de la Mujer exhibition Insurgencias, art by women on the border in the era of Cold War at the front. And I was talking with Yolanda on the phone and trying to help her text me the statement that she wanted to include here alongside these photographs in the exhibition. And in the end, we couldn't figure out how to get her text to work. So she said, you know what, I'm just gonna dictate it to you. And so I'd like to read the statement that she wrote and end on that note. Las Santas Locas de San Francisco beautifully presented themselves as self-possessed, thoroughly confident, without rancor or false levity. I find them whole and wholesome human beings, caught up in fashion, as they should be as young women. Boldly wearing Dickies, guys' pants, much like women and movie stars have done for decades, appropriating the symbolic power suit of men of their class. Some of Las Santas have chosen for their group portrait the garb of working class men in lowrider culture. As the years have gone by, these images have offered me unexpected insight. My respect for their dignity continues, as well as my respect for their courage. Thank you so much for remembering these young women. They are grown women today in their 50s. I had the privilege of watching some of them gather around this series in an exhibition at the Mission Cultural Center for Latino Arts. Some are grandmothers now. I was thrilled to see them point with joy and commentary at the pictures. Que vivan las santas locas, que vivan. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much to all of our panelists. Let's move out of the slide presentation. I'm almost speechless, and I just have to thank all of you for sharing so generously and so vulnerably. And I know Yolanda was so important to all of you, and I'm just grateful. I'm struck by how each presentation has highlighted different Yolandas, different aspects of her work. You know, from my notes, I have, you know, her life force and erotics, her politics and her wit and her capacity for irony, you know, the way she prioritized her community. And I think just in general, how her practice encompassed so much more than image making. You know, it was the project of being a human being, and just, yeah, her fundamental generosity. I want to acknowledge that, you know, that our discussion this week continues one that was started 2 weeks ago. There was a panel held by the Visual Arts Department at UCSD, and I know probably not everyone was there for that panel, but some tonight were there. And you know, that panel really focused on the immediate context of Yolanda's life in the 1970s and her time at UCSD. And for our discussion, what remains of our time, I really wanted to invite the panel to consider the, you know, concrete ways that Yolanda's influence and legacy is felt in our contemporary moment, and her relevance to the complexities of our own time. I think that has emerged in many of these presentations. Yolanda's legacy is evident in the work each of you do, and so this is also an opportunity for each of you to respond to one another and to your presence tonight, your presentations tonight. So with that, let me open the conversation to the panelists, and then we will take some questions from the audience with the time that we have left. Who would like to jump in?
I can break the silence. I think for me, when I think of Yolanda's legacy and her impact in the moment and in the now, I obviously see all of the amazing women that are panelists here today. I think for all of us, Yolanda gave us the tools to dismember and disrupt the status quo, and expected us to use them and held us accountable for using them, and reminded us all the time to disrupt and to keep working at it. And she was really supportive, and she continued to kind of to hold us to that responsibility, acknowledging her own impact in having brought us that tools, but then being super excited about seeing what we were going to do with them. And I think we all have memories of just seeing her reaction to the work that we were doing, and being like surprised and amazed and excited in seeing herself and us, and seeing how we saw ourselves in her. And I think that was really, really powerful. One of the big lessons that I learned, and I'm still processing this as I sit inside of my altar, is this idea of centering the self. And as daughters of immigrants and daughters of a generation who taught us to put ourselves last, and to think of family first, and to live in a world of self-sacrifice for the collective, coming across Yolanda's work meant, and challenging ourselves with Yolanda's work meant acknowledging our own role and the value that we play for ourselves, and centering ourselves and pushing ourselves to be important and to be the centers of our narratives. And that isn't something that we were raised with. But the juxtaposition of doing that while keeping the collective at heart, that is a real challenge there. And that is a real beautiful moment that we could put ourselves in our altares, and we could center ourselves and understand the value, the importance of ourself and our beings, while at the same time being there for our communities and co-inhabiting in this space and moving forward with a collective, with this collective consciousness. I think it's a beautiful juxtaposition of lessons learned from Yolanda's work, and from the theory that was rooted in it, and the theory that came after it, and the theory that, and the production that continues to happen with all of our work and all of our with Jessica's murals and exhibitions, and Sara Solomani's kind of work, and the exhibition at Dia de la Mujer, and all of these are just kind of testaments to us finding new and exciting ways to continue to push that work forward. And I think that's a legacy that is 45 years in the making, but it's just getting started.
Yeah, I wanted to add something, which was, I think, and I can't remember which of my fellow panelists brought up the statement that she was before her time. So I think that is something that now you can kind of see it, that people are, especially scholars and curators and other artists, are catching up with it and understanding how important her work was and how just multi-layered. And so I think that's something that it's like she laid it out, and now we're catching up. And I think that's part of, I guess, I'm not going to say that, you know, she consciously did that, because I'm sure she would have wanted more. And we have heard that, you know, she would have wanted more at the time she was doing all this. But I think it is a testament to her, and, you know, that she kept up with it and still kept doing it, and sort of not only being an example, but giving this, just this breadth of work that I think there's going to be so much scholarship generated in the future, not only from the paintings, but, you know, the photography, which a lot of people don't even know about. And so, you know, being able to look at that work and see how she, in a sense, put it out there, and now we're catching up with it, which is, I think, like I said, a testament to her.
I just want to say a few words about the foundation she laid around helping us to engage with spirituality in a decolonial way. Even though Yolanda Lopez, and I remember this in one of her presentations, would not identify as a spiritual person, you know, and at the same time, her like engagement with life, you know, her zest for living and being herself and discovering herself and doing it so boldly, you know, without people's permissions and without worrying whether it was going to be accepted or not, to me is a very spiritual position, you know, to take. She had so much fuerza, and she helps those of us who are engaged with feminist and decolonial approaches to spirituality, in that she really points out the ways that Guadalupe was used, as she says, a tool of conquest. You know, she wanted us to be really critical of that. And then through her life's work shows how we can engage with tools of liberation, you know, and not just in looking forward. You know, I think that's so important for us to engage in those questions, because we don't want like the fundamentalist right to hijack issues of spirit and spirituality. Like we also need to engage with that and claim it. And so not just looking forward, but looking back in terms of insisting that we remember these genealogies, these ancestral genealogies, indigenous genealogies, even as we're not just recovering, but really like reimagining them and reinvigorating them in the context of today, you know, and helping us push against the really harmful ways of thinking about thinking in dualities, you know, us versus them, you know, and to think from other frameworks of complementarity, of equilibrium, you know, of paradox, you know, and she offers us that, you know, to keep delving into that. And definitely she was doing this visually before the Chicana scholars, you know, were writing. So I feel like we have careers because of Yolanda Lopez's work in many ways. And you know, and like Jessica mentioned, it is heartbreaking that she didn't get the recognition in her life that she merited, you know, and that she struggled throughout her life. And at the same time, it, like what Leticia was saying, you know, it's like behooves us to continue that legacy and be responsible, you know, descendants of Yolanda Lopez as one of our matriarchal ancestors.
And if I could just add a couple of words as well. As time goes on, in front of each new Chicana and Chicano studies, Chicanic studies, Mexican American studies class that I teach as an adjunct across so many different institutions in the region and online, even abroad. But each time I, you know, invoke Yolanda and I bring her work forward, I feel like, you know, I get a little bit closer to her, and each time the work becomes a little bit more also mine too. Like I become her, and I, you know, I don't, not that I become her, but that I can really see the work through her eyes more and more each time I teach it. And I come closer to her, and I think it was designed that way. That's what she wanted. She wanted for us to be able to see ourselves, especially, you know, women of color in these spaces of the institution, see ourselves in it and through it, and to be able to over time grow a closer relationship with it. And as we teach and connect with learners in the community, that it should be from this personal is political context, right? And she really wanted for her work to be accessible and available freely to all, you know. And so she made these little pocket posters of her work and would hand these out, you know, in order to counteract the sort of elitist, you know, lack of access to the arts for members of the working class, you know, which tend to be also people of color, people who are often represented in images, but who don't get to see themselves represented in those images, or don't get to have a say in how they are represented. And so I just, I guess I wanted to close with that, just where Yolanda has brought me and how I feel that she continues to hold my hand when I teach about her work.
I love that. I think that's really maybe a great place to conclude our conversation. One of Yolanda's pocket postcards, the opposite side, says, educate, mentor, protect. And I think in so many ways that summarizes what her project and what she was all about. And you know, we've run long tonight, but this has just been extraordinary to hear from all of you. I want to thank you again for your time and just your powerful, beautiful words tonight. And it's just incredible to see how Yolanda's work has impacted each of you, and is it's, you know, continues in the present moment. So thank you again, and everyone take good care. Stay safe.